All right. Hey, everybody. It is very good to be here. And yeah, it does feel like we've passed through something. And I'm feeling grateful this morning. It's really good to see your faces and masks or no masks. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do this safely. And meanwhile, the Michigan government and the CDC changed the guidelines. And so just want to say, if you are vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. That's what the rules are, unless you feel uncomfortable. If you are not vaccinated, still inside, they're encouraging masks, as you may know. So I'll leave that to you all. It seems like you've been trying to do the smart thing and the right thing. You're all here. So I'm just want to say again how grateful I am that we can be together. And just so you know, we're treating today a bit like an experiment. And I'm going to talk for a little while, and then John's going to play some music, and that's going to be it. Pretty simple. I always my talks are really short, so we'll see how it goes. And then originally the idea was that if you want to socialize, we were going to encourage people to do that outside. I'd still like to make that as a suggestion, but that's not because of the change in guidelines. You are already socializing. A bunch of rebels in here speaking to each other. So anyway, today's a bit like an experiment, and we'll gather again the first week of July, just like this, maybe with some changes. I can see we already need more chairs. So that was one of the things that we're testing. Who would show up if we got back together in person? And some people are not. They're joining us online, and welcome, and I'm pleased about that. And we're going to continue that sort of online presence. We always had it anyway, but I don't know what it's been like for you, but it's been a pretty significant part of my life. And I think it's been a pretty important way of staying connected and related and in conversation with one another. And our online community has grown, and so we want to do what we can to stay connected to the people that have joined us on the World Wide Web. So anyway, first week of July, we'll be doing this again, and then we'll see. We're having conversations about how and when and how often, and are we going to put the pedal down and just go for it after that? And but anyway, that's to give you a little forecast. I guess I can start my talk now. It's nice to not be speaking only to a camera. It's been an interesting experiment, and in a way I've kind of enjoyed it. But it's nice to have a little human energy in the room. So if you've been following us up to this point, I've been talking about meaning. That's been the theme for the year. Meaning matters. And I don't know, maybe it was fate or some kind of accident, but it seems like every single month we've bumped into a word that has seemed relevant and pressing. Every month we take a look at a different word, and the word for this month is goodness. And I already feel a certain amount of goodness just being together like this, and it feels celebratory in a way, and also a little painful. I mean, if I'm honest about it, because if there's such a thing as goodness, there's the opposite of it. And we've felt also the opposite of goodness. It's also been a hard year. I mean, I want to ask a question, and we can just do it sort of by show of hands. How many of you experienced some loss this year in your family? Like you lost a loved one? Yeah, see? That's what I mean. So to celebrate goodness is also a little painful. And I want to acknowledge that. And I was thinking of Bill Wiedema, who passed away. And I wanted to begin our gathering this morning just by having a moment of silence. And I want to invite you just to close your eyes and reflect just briefly on the people who you may have lost this year, friends or relatives or loved ones, somewhat in your circles. And let's just pause for a moment and bring them to mind. Yeah, so thank you. There's something at least powerful to me um, in being together and making noise, and also being together and being silent. Something sort of strange and mysterious and connecting about such a thing. Um, so where do I want to go today with a conversation about goodness? Uh, I think I'll start with a definition. That seems like a fair enough uh, starting point. And when you think about goodness, or even the word good, I went down the etymology track, as I like to do, because often the history of words, just like the history of human beings, reveals something. Your own ancestry, there are clues in your own ancestry in terms of your makeup and your worldview and your ideas and your DNA and unfinished business. Well, same is true with words. So just in terms of etymology, I want to remind us of something. What do we mean when we say good? Something like favorable or valuable. Something that's good is favorable or valuable. There's a certain amount of value to it. Or it's full. There's a fullness to it. There's even a connection with unity. It's unitive. So something that is good is unitive. It's full. It's connected. It has value. And it's favorable. Now, this is going to sound a bit like I'm not saying anything at all, which is one of my favorite things to do. So it's something like this. If goodness is a thing, and if the good is a thing, that means that the opposite is also present, the absence of goodness. And it leads us into a conversation that nobody likes to talk about right now, which is a kind of hierarchy. You know, hierarchy is like a bad thing. Like if I were to start an organization and say, hey, let's make it all about hierarchy, people are like, oh, this guy's dangerous. Hierarchy is one of those like words that makes people uncomfortable. By the way, if you should read some Ken Wilber on the subject of hierarchy, he talks about something he calls a nested hierarchy, which is very interesting. So it's just a side note for your footnotes. But hierarchy is interesting because it's a ranking. That's all it is. It's a ranking. Something is better than something else. Now, in a postmodern world, that makes people uncomfortable. We don't want to say that. We don't want to say, well, what was valuable to you is that's fine. What's valuable to me, we don't like that. It's like we feel uncomfortable around conversations of any kind of value system that is ranked. But I want to ask you a question. Is goodness better than the absence of goodness? Some of you are like, I don't know. In some ways, it's kind of simple. Yeah, it's not a trick question. It's a straightforward. You know, I used to teach Christian school. I used to teach in a Christian school, and the answer was always Jesus, no matter what. You know, is goodness better than the absence? Jesus. So That's an interesting observation. It means that, in some sense, that's part of what it means to be a human being, is to just begin the conversation of ordering things. You know, the Ten Commandments, for example, all that is an ordering of what is socially valuable. That's all it is. It's an order. Now, you can disagree and say murdering people is fine. You know, let's take it off the list, you know? Or you can say this is better than the absence of. And it's not the same thing as saying, well, in doing so, I'm 100% right. We're not talking about being right and wrong necessarily. We're talking about just entering the conversation of valuing things. Is goodness better than the absence of? I'll come to this in a few minutes, but is beauty better than something that's ugly? And we need ugly things. I mean, the world is chaos at times. But it's like the push, the opposite push is the thing that pulls us into the conversation. And if you think about your own life, would I like to live a life of goodness? The answer is probably something like yes. Wouldn't you agree? Because it's a value. It seems to be a value that we carry. That's pretty deep. It might be innate, we could go so far as to say. So something like that. One of the things that has become evident to me already, I guess I'm starting to feel like, here's a question that we could maybe even carry into the fall. And it might be too early already, but part of me wants to say, did I learn anything over the last year and a half? Did I learn anything? Because if the answer is no, then I'm talking to myself. I have a problem in the sense of this was a challenging season of life globally. Wouldn't you agree? And in America, an election that was just smooth and there was no fighting and it was lovely, you know, and of course COVID and the economy and racial issues, and you know the list is long. Did I learn anything at all? Is there anything to be learned? So I'm already starting to wonder about that. I mean, you don't want to be too quick on the draw, you know, to say, because most people who learn something immediately are just repeating something they already thought they believed. And this is sort of like confirming what they already know. I'm asking something like, did I learn anything at all? One of the things I think I've been challenged with, because I've found even my own worldview, my own ideas, my own political ideas, my own ideas about economy, my own ideas about religion, my own ideas about spirituality have been challenged some this year. And I think, you know, in some ways I'm pleased that they've been challenged, although that doesn't feel very good. We all want to, like, you know, what I already think and know is great, and away I go into the world. But there was something just about the chaotic nature of the last year and a half that I think has pushed against that. So I will say that the question of what do I really value, what do I really believe, how do I want to live in the world, what do I think about my fellow human beings, those kinds of questions have been elevated, I would say. In other words, they're questions of meaning. Like the series that I've been in, Meaning Matters, it's almost like a problem for me. Well, does it or does it not? How much do I want to commit my own life to the pursuit, the question, the wrestling with what's a meaningful life? And what's a meaningful life for me? What's a meaningful life for others? What's a meaningful life for the planet, for our society? Anyway, my main point is that 2020 has challenged some of that stuff. And there's something that it's hard to put my finger on, so I'm going to have to use a myth, because that's the best way of putting your finger on something. There's a spirit at work that, for the time being, I'm going to call the spirit of Set, S-E-T. I'm sure you were just thinking about it this morning. All right? The spirit of Set. Set is an Egyptian god. And he's the god of darkness, terror, and chaos. All right? And he happens to be, like all good stories, the brother of the king, who's Osiris. You know, it's like the Cain and Abel story. It's like East of Eden. You've got a problem with the brothers, right? So on the one hand, you have a king, Osiris, who's blind, which is interesting. It tells you it's a little clue. And what's the clue? Kings are blind. And that's a problem for the culture if it stays that way too long. And Set enters the story. And what's interesting about Set is that he gets into a fight with his brother Osiris and tears him to shreds and scatters his body all over Egypt and the underworld. By the way, you should read the myth on your own. The only thing that can fix this is the feminine. So that's Isis, all right? But my main point right now is that Set's only desire is to destroy. It's not destruction and renewal, because that's one thing. Sometimes things get torn down so you can build something else. The spirit of Set is tear the whole thing down to the ground. Just tear it down. There's mistrust, there's suspicion, there's cynicism, there's darkness. Just burn the thing to the ground. Now, search your own heart for a second and ask, have I felt that at all this year? I have. Just wanting things to ignite. Let it burn. And, okay, sometimes that happens. But what I'm suggesting is that the spirit of Set goes too far. There's not the pursuit of restoration, of goodness. It's just let it burn. And I think the spirit of Set is alive in our age, in America. I think you can find the spirit of Set across the political spectrum, left and right. I think you can find the spirit of Set in what's going on in other countries. And cynicism, you know, it's hard for me to criticize cynicism because I grew up in the 90s. And it was the grunge era of rock and roll. It was like a celebration of cynicism in a way. I mean, it wasn't just that. It was many other wonderful good things. But there's something, it's contagious. The spirit of cynicism is contagious. It feels good in the body to be so negative. That's an evolutionary thing, by the way, because I've probably mentioned this before, but our brains, now my teaching is going to get really long here because now I'm going down a rabbit trail, but our brains are hardwired in a way, even though I don't really like that as a metaphor, to pay attention to negative emotion and strong negative experiences. Why? Because we have to survive. So it's like glue, it sticks to us. And that kind of like burn it down, tear it down, negativity, it's attractive in some way. It's enlivening, even though the effects aren't very good probably for us or for other people who come in contact with it. But anyway, my main point is it's contagious. And I'm bringing this up because to have a conversation about goodness in general, I think we have to recognize that there's the opposite of it. And that we're capable of the opposite of it. And that to take any kind of step, action, embodiment of goodness in a way is to take a step away from the Egyptian god Set. And to say, okay, sometimes things get destroyed, but what kind of person would I like to be in the world? Because if I just step way back for a second and say something very simple, which is the United States, this community, Grand Haven, the globe, has gone through something challenging. And there's been some suffering. Would you agree with that as a statement? And part of what I think um, might be asked of us is, well, how do we heal from such a thing? Correct? How do we heal from such a thing? How do we? And part of the answer to that is, I think, found in a word like goodness. Because let me remind you of what it means to pursue the favorable and the valuable fullness and what's unitive, to act in the world that way, to connect things. Unitive is a very interesting image or word. To unite, to bring together. Do you see how that is the opposite of set, which is tear everything, and literally shredded Osiris to bits and threw his fragments into the underworld? You're going to have a very good time later on if you look up this myth online, which I suggest you do, to find out how Osiris comes back together again. You'll be like, oh, I see why he paused there. Okay. Okay, I have one other direction I'd like to go. Because, again, I think I'm steeped in the biblical tradition, and that's my training. That's my formal training, so I can't get out of thinking and hearing and seeing images. So one of the things that, as I was just reflecting on the word goodness and a word like good, is I thought about the first chapter of Genesis. The number one repeated word in the first chapter of Genesis is good. That the created order or creation is good. And that's funny because ordinarily, when we think about good, we tend to think about it ethically or morally, correct? Like if we tell a kid, you're not being good, we mean that ethically, right? Or morally. But that's what's funny about Genesis. What is ethical about the sun or the stars or the moon or the ocean or the tides or the wings of a bird? So goodness in this sense is deeper than doing the right thing or some sort of ethical decision. It's sort of just a statement about the way things are. And I think there is a connection. My guess is it has something to do with beauty. Let me ask you a question. Do you think beauty is good? I tend to like it. It's all right. Let's ask it like the other question. Do you think beauty is better than its opposite? Well, something like that. And I think part of what the story of Genesis is trying to say is just the way things are. If you go out there to the Lake Michigan and you stand there, there's something good about it, meaning there's something beautiful about it. It just is. And there it is. And we're connected and a part of this thing, the being of life. And it's beautiful. Doesn't mean it's always your friend. Because nature has its own disordering component, which traditionally is called chaos. But in this sense, it's just a reminder. Yeah, okay, there's something good. There's something beautiful. By the way, David White says of beauty, he says, beauty is the conversation, or something like that. Beauty is found in symmetries and asymmetries. You know, beauty is found in symmetries and asymmetries. It's very mysterious. What makes something beautiful? What makes something not beautiful? That's maybe another word for another time. But my main point is I think there's a relationship here between beauty, goodness, the good, tov in Hebrew it would be called, and a life of goodness. Because if I just ask simply, well, I'd like to live a life of goodness, part of the answer to that to me is going to be a life of beauty. A certain amount of beauty is to be pursued, and beauty is complex. Let's take your own house, for example. There's a room in your house where you spend most of your time, besides the bathroom, okay? And ask yourself a question. Do I want the place where I spend my time to be beautiful or not? Most of you are going to say yes to that. And you probably have already tried to make it beautiful. Wouldn't you agree? Why? Tear it down, burn it up. Sit in the starkness of the absence of nothingness. No. I'm saying the pursuit of goodness, in a way, can begin in that simple relationship. How am I relating to the world? How do I relate to my own space? Would I like it to be beautiful? Would I like it to be favorable, valuable, full, and unitive? Yeah, I would like a little more of that. And so you might buy your favorite painting and put it on the wall, or something more meaningful like a painting from one of your friends. Or why waste your time with such stuff? I think I'm going to steal something from the psychologist James Hillman. He says, monotheism is real. There's only one God, and it's called the economy. I love that because when it comes to the question of value, we live in a culture that worships the one God called the economy. We run everything through that. But the only thing that can't pass through that is beauty. How do you quantify such a thing? Now, you can say, all right, paintings are worth something. Just, there seems to be, it's poking around in something. So in terms of a life of goodness, I'm assuming most of you, like me, want to pursue a life of goodness in whatever way we can. So what are you going to do about it? How are you going to arrange your own room? Or now that we can have people over for dinner, how are you going to set the table? I'm telling you, these are not small things. These are deep acts of goodness in the world. How would you like to be moving forward? What would it look like to pursue a life of goodness, to cultivate a certain way of seeing or being in the world that is restorative, unitive, valuable, good, favorable, on the other side of whatever it is that we just passed through as a culture? And it's not over, but we've gone through something. So here's a line from Hafez. First I'll read it and then it doesn't really need much interpretation, but I'll say a couple things about it and then I'm done. How did the rose ever open its heart and give to this world all its beauty? How did the rose ever open its heart and give to this world all its beauty? How did the rose ever open its heart and give to this world all its beauty? It felt the encouragement of the light. It felt the encouragement of the light against its being. It felt the encouragement of the light against its being. Otherwise, we all remain too frightened. It felt the encouragement of light against its being. Otherwise, we all remain too frightened. My guess is that Hafez is talking about fully blooming in the world, opening up. And it's interesting because as a culture, that's what we're doing right now. We're opening back up again. But when you open yourself back up again, it's a bit dangerous. There are things to be afraid of. Even coming into this space, the first time I've been in a space with this many people in who knows how long. So it's like, I don't know where to stand, I don't know how close is too close, mask, no mask. Is there, some sort of virus flying through the air that's going to get me? You can't help it at this point. So, and what are you going to say? Well, I have a vaccine. Good, but it's still unknown. You don't even know where is the vaccine in my body. Is there like a little fortress in there? And they're like, okay, all right. So it's all very mysterious. It's strange. But Hafez is talking about being open, and he's talking about blooming. He's talking about the rose opening up its beauty. And he's talking about human beings. He's talking about you and your own heart. So, anyway, he says, how did the rose ever open its heart to give to this world all its beauty? It felt the encouragement of the light. And I take this as the push of something like goodness and beauty against us. Because one part of us wants to remain closed, because being closed is safer. But the light, goodness, beauty, what's valuable, it's like it pushes against that. Listen to it. It felt the encouragement of light against its being. Do you feel how that's like an odd image? It's encouraging it, but it's against it at the same time. It's pushing against our desire to close up. But in pushing, it's encouraging us. If you want to know what this feels like, afterwards, go lie down in the sun. See what it feels like to be encouraged by the light, or by wind, or by being, or by goodness, or by beauty, or FaceTime your grandchild and say, I think I want to remain closed. Do you feel what I'm getting at? It felt the encouragement of light against its being. Otherwise, we all remain too frightened. That's how I want to end my talk today. There's good reason to remain frightened, says one part of us. And I just want to say, I hope today you feel a little bit of the encouragement of light, of goodness and beauty and being, to allow that opening to begin to happen. And I think that's no small thing. And I think our culture, in the spirit of Set, really needs more human hearts that are blossoming and opening.